Let's jump right into today's explainer because we are looking at something that is honestly one of the most mind-bending engineering marvels in human history. We're talking about the staggering secrets of the Ajanta and Ellora caves in Maharashtra, India, and we're going to put a massive spotlight on the Kailasa temple. Using some deep archaeological insights, we're going to unpack how these ancient engineers pulled off feats that would be practically impossible for us to do even today. Seriously, think about this for a second. How do you build a massive, freestanding 100-foot-tall structure without ever laying a foundation? No stacking bricks, no pouring concrete. It sounds completely impossible, right? Well, the answer is wild. They carved an entire mountain strictly from the top down. Imagine being the architect. You literally have to finalize the entire blueprint in your head before a single rock is even chipped away. Because if you make one mistake, you can't put the rock back. The whole temple is ruined. So how on earth did they actually pull this off? Well, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the art of carving mountains. Second, Ajanta, stories hidden in colors. Third, the Kailasa temple, an architectural marvel. Fourth, stone forms of the epics. And finally, Ravana Anugraha, destruction of ego. Okay, let's get into section 1, the art of carving mountains. To really wrap our heads around these structures, we have to look at the raw materials. The geological knowledge these ancient builders had was absolutely next level. Everything we're looking at in Maharashtra's rock-cut architecture is carved straight out of basalt. Now, this basalt was formed like 65 million years ago from flowing lava. But here's the kicker. Not all lava is the same. The builders figured out pretty quickly to avoid what geologists call ah-ah flows. Those are clinkery, super unstable, and basically impossible to carve nicely. Instead, they specifically hunted down pahoho flows. These are smooth, horizontally spread layers of rock that are beautifully homogeneous. They literally experimented for decades just to find the absolute perfect layers of 65-million-year-old lava to use as their canvas. And depending on the rock they found, they used two completely different engineering styles. On one hand, you have cut-in architecture. This is exactly what it sounds like. You dig directly into a vertical rock face to hollow out a cave or a room. But then you have the wildly more difficult cut-out architecture. This involves cutting down into the mountain to isolate a massive block of rock and then carving it so it stands completely free from the mountain. It looks like a traditional building, but it is literally made of one single continuous piece of the earth. Moving on to section 2, Ajanta, stories hidden in colors. Let's look at the ultimate example of that cut-in technique. The crucial thing to understand about the Ajanta caves is that they weren't just places to live. They were incredible visual educational tools. They started carving these around the 2nd century BCE, and they are famous for these breathtaking, vibrant frescoes. They basically used the cave walls as a giant textbook to teach Buddhist philosophy, mostly through Jataka tales, which are stories of the Buddha's past lives. For instance, there's this stunning depiction of the Vasant Jataka, showing a king giving up his incredibly luxurious palace life, complete with detailed paintings of his dancers and musicians, just to become a monk. There are also murals of miracles, like the miracle of Stravasti, where Buddha multiplies into 1,000 forms. And for us, today, these paintings are a literal time machine. Because of the insane detail, we can see exactly what ancient Indian palace architecture, clothing, and even jewelry actually looked like thousands of years ago. All right, section 3, Kailasa Temple, an architectural marvel. So if Ajanta is the masterpiece of cut-in caves, the Kailasa Temple at Ellora is the undisputed heavyweight champion of cutout architecture. The timeline here, driven by the Rashtrakuta dynasty, is just nuts. It was started by King Danti Durga and then continued by his successor, King Krishna, in the 8th century, all designed in this intricate southern Dravidian style. But here is the sheer, undeniable genius of it. Because they carved it from the top of the mountain down to the floor, they didn't need any wooden scaffolding. Zero. You just stand on the raw mountain rock, carve the ceiling beneath your feet, and dig your way down. But again, the planning required for that. The architect had to visualize every single pillar, every statue, every room before the very first strike of a chisel. 250. That is the estimated number of workers who spent roughly 5 entire years doing nothing but digging 3 massive trenches around the rock. And that was before any of the fine carving could even start. They had to completely isolate this gargantuan block of rock first. We're talking trenches that were 270 feet long and 100 feet deep. They moved millions of cubic feet of solid basalt using nothing but simple iron chisels. Honestly, it's an unmatched feat of sheer human endurance. Let's dive into section 4, stone forms of the epics. Once those workers finally reached the bottom floor,
The details they carved into this place were just as mind-blowing as the excavation itself. If you look at the base of this massive structure, it actually appears to be resting entirely on the backs of giant 10 to 12-foot tall stone elephants. And the temple itself functions like a massive library in stone. If a devotee circumambulates, walks around the temple, they are reading the great epics. On the northern wall, you have the Mahabharata and the life of Krishna, completely laid out in rows of detailed sculptures. Walk over to the southern wall, and you're reading the Ramayana, step by step, from the exile in Ayodhya all the way to the battle in Lanka. It is a full-blown educational institution, carved out of one single rock.
And the architecture doesn't just tell stories, it deliberately embeds profound philosophy. As you enter the space, you are immediately hit with these absolute dualities. Over on one side, you have Dakshinamurti, this beautifully calm, peaceful sculpture of Shiva, acting as the ultimate bestower of knowledge. But then, directly opposite that, sits Kajaya Surasamhara, a fierce, downright terrifying form of Shiva, destroying darkness and ignorance. The message is super clear right from the start. The divine is there to protect and teach you, for sure, but it will also ruthlessly destroy your inner darkness. And this specific layout deliberately prepares your mind for the ultimate lesson waiting deeper inside.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 5, Ravana Anagraha, Destruction of Ego.
This is the absolute emotional and philosophical climax of today's explainer. Everything in this architectural journey culminates in a massive stone relief panel telling the story of the Ravana Anagraha. The carving shows the incredibly arrogant King Ravana, completely flushed with power and this massive inflated ego, literally trying to uproot Mount Kailash from the earth. The sculpture brilliantly captures the mountain trembling, and the goddess Parvati is visibly panicking. But Shiva, sitting right there at the top, is perfectly calm. He doesn't even stand up. With just a single toe, he lightly presses down on the mountain, and the sheer weight of that one toe instantly pins Ravana underneath, totally crushing his arms. For 1,000 years, Ravana is trapped under the mountain, crying out and repenting, until his massive arrogance is finally broken and he is forgiven. It's brilliant because the physical, towering scale of the mountain in the carving perfectly mirrors Ravana's massive ego, which is just effortlessly subdued by the divine. And we have to end with this powerful takeaway. Just take a step back and think about what we've looked at today. The builders of the Kailasa temple moved millions of tons of solid basalt. They carved an entire mountaintop down with no scaffolding, creating a 100-foot-tall freestanding masterpiece. And yet, this entire impossible feat of human engineering was ultimately designed to teach us one deeply intimate, humbling lesson. No matter how powerful you become, ego must be destroyed. Either you end your ego, or your ego will end you. Which really begs the question, what massive mountains of ego are you trying to uproot in your own life right now? And what would actually happen if you just let them go? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next one.